I talk about business strategy a lot on this podcast, and I also like to invite a lot of my guests, including CEOs and industry thought leaders, to help share their thoughts around the subject. Today's podcast episode is no different. Today's podcast episode is focused on helping you to get your products on more store shelves and into the hands of more shoppers. Your business strategy is so critically important. It's the roadmap to your success. And nowhere is it more important than in categories you're disrupting, where you're doing something different than anyone else. Let me explain. Today's show focuses on plant-based. One of the challenges that we run into a lot when we're talking about plant-based is that retailers, brokers, and distributors don't know what to do with these products or how to merchandise them. The point is this: using the traditional strategies, the cookie cutter strategies that most people apply, are not going to differentiate you from your competition. This is where the real value of knowledge and expertise comes into play, even more so than probably any other category. This is where you get what you pay for. Instead of relying on someone who read a book or someone who had a little bit of experience in the area, this is where you need a lot of help. And you need the expertise to help your retail partner drive sustainable sales with your product and other like products in the category. This is exactly why this podcast exists. This is exactly why I put out all the content that I do, to help give you the strategies that everyone else overlooks, to scale and grow your brand, to help you stand out on a crowded shelf. Let me explain. Shoppers today hate scavenger hunts. Have you ever had a difficult time finding an item that you like within certain stores? For example, in the mainstream stores in my neighborhood, if you want to buy organic products, well, then obviously you need to shop in the baking aisle. Now, I might sound like I'm being a little sarcastic, but the reality is that that's where most of the natural organic products live in the most mainstream stores in my neighborhood. From my perspective, this is a huge mistake on the part of the retailer. As a shopper, I'm going to compare like items so that I can choose the products that best meet my needs. I want to be able to easily compare vegan cheese to regular cheese, plant-based meat to regular meat, and so on. The best part about this is that the natural, organic, plant-based, etc. items are the ones that are driving sustainable sales across every category. This is why it's critically important that you be an expert in this area, and then you hire people and surround yourself with people that can help you make the difference. This is the focus of this podcast episode: working with experts that can help you help your retail partner understand how they can leverage your brand to grow sustainable sales and profits in their store if it's merchandised correctly, so that it makes it easier for the consumers to find and buy the products that they love. In order to do this effectively, you need a well thought out, compelling fact-based story as to why the retailer should merchandise your product next to their mainstream counterparts, their non-plant-based products. At the end of the day, remember, retailers generically don't make anything. They sell real estate in the form of the space that your product takes up on their shelf. Retailers want three things: more traffic in their store, a reasonable profit, and a competitive advantage in their market. If you can help them achieve their objectives, then savvy retailers might reward you with incremental merching opportunities, incremental promotional opportunities, and an equal seat at the table when discussing brand strategy or category strategy. This is where you become much more than just another product on a retailer's shelf. Instead, you become a valued and trusted, respected resource to your retail partner. Trust me, the payoff here can be huge, as some of the stories that I've shared on different episodes of the podcast. This is where it gets back to having a real expert, a knowledgeable expert to help guide the retailer as to where your products need to be merchandised. This all begins with you becoming an expert in your brand and in the consumers that buy your brand. That's what this episode's about. Today we're talking about plant-based products and how to maximize each and every selling opportunity with plant-based products. Now, this also works with gluten-free and other attributes as well, so everyone's going to want to stay tuned. At Brand Secrets and Strategies, you learn how to save valuable time and money, where you learn strategies to get your products on more store shelves and into the hands of more shoppers, empowering brands and raising the bar. Thank you, Daniel, for coming on today. Can you please start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your journey to plant-based solutions, including as a chef?
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Daniel Karsavar. I'm the CEO of Plant-Based Solutions. Wow, so I started my career quite some time ago as a chef. I actually started off university as a science major. So I had my mindset on, a pursuit of science. But as a kid, I was really into science. I was really into cooking. And I wanted to go to culinary school, and family didn't think that was the best idea. and should study, something a little bit more substantial. At the end of the day, I went to culinary school anyway, all being said and done, and it's been a great, amazing journey. I feel like I've had many lives as a chef, as a restaurateur, then spent a year in Europe doing some cooking and traveling. When I came back to the States in the mid 90s, I started actually on the business side, front of house of restaurants, and started working with independent and restaurant groups in terms of management, opening restaurants. So I had this, real focus on kind of the operational, how do you execute, how do you train, put systems in place, and make business more efficient. That led me to moving out of the independent restaurant world into food service, which was really interesting. I had worked with Restaurant Associates at the time, which then became acquired by Compass Group, I'm sure you're familiar with on the food service side. So this was running museums, cultural institutions, starting in New York, then Washington, D.C., for a few years. And it was really exciting. The National Gallery of Art, the Smithsonian operations there. So you're talking about, multiple restaurant outlets, millions of tourists and visitors, really interesting business side of the food world. So then I moved back to New York in 2007. I was working for Starwood Hotels, doing food and beverage concept development for the global brands. Really exciting time. Learned a lot about brands, about what does it mean to really identify a brand and have brand integrity, which I've thankfully been able to transfer over into the plant-based CPG world. Did that for about 3 years, and then transitioned into the CPG world and running, helping to open and run Chloe's Soft Serve Fruit, which became Chloe's Fruit Pops or Chloe's Pops. That was about 2010, and really exciting time. It was when all the frozen yogurt chains were coming around, and this was an alternative to frozen yogurt as a vegan offering, clean label, really healthy. And I ran that for 4 years. For me, it was a time also where I was kind of reflecting on my own diet, having gone through some health issues when I was in DC. So actually spent a year going through cancer treatment, and it took me a little while to figure how to incorporate a healthy lifestyle into my diet. Once recovery was finished, was eating mostly vegetarian at that time, and but really happy to be part of kind of this healthy, plant forward focused environment. After that, I started really helping other companies in the plant-based space, help them on their journey, both mentoring and consulting. That's where I met David Benzikin, who had started Plant-Based Solutions, probably around the same time, or maybe 2012. So he was, at the time, Plant-Based Solutions was a little more focused on marketing, helping companies in the plant-based space get funding or prepare for funding. And I had been more focused on the concept development, culinary development, launching, getting to market, working with third-party manufacturers. So it was a really good complement. He would send people my way, I would send people his way. And after a few years, he was really fortunate to have developed and launched Ocean Hugger Foods, as you know, through Plant-Based Solutions, and was running that full time and needed someone to come on board to run Plant-Based Solutions. So right around this time, kind of all the things, came together in the sense as, I had moved into a completely plant-based diet, looked like a great opportunity. Last summer in July, I came on board to really help run and kind of strategize, what the future of plant-based solutions can be. Thankfully, it's an exciting time for the plant-based food space, with the most recent IPO of Beyond Meat. All the investors are excited about it. It's kind of in all the, news cycles, mainstream restaurant chain. So it's an exciting time. So we looked to see how we could position it, and basically took all of last year to kind of relook at what services we're offering, how we're helping companies, maybe a little less focus on the day-to-day consulting, a little more on the advisory, strategic growth or direction, looking at a lot of international brands, looking to come into the US, Europe, South America as well. Some exciting things there. And also to think about how to position the mentoring that both David and I have done in a more robust fashion. And that was really to look at, excuse me, sorry, to look at how to rework some of the mentoring that both David and I had been doing to reach a broader audience. And this was the idea behind this plant-based solutions masterclass on how to really develop, launch, and scale a plant-based food product. So we spent a lot of time. We went out to Expo, Natural Products Expo West last March. I spoke about innovation in plant-based, which was fantastic. We had our big investor event where we had about 150 plant-based brands apply online to participate. This was an opportunity for mission-driven plant-based investors to meet one-on-one, kind of in a curated fashion. End of the day, we had about 50 investors, about 50 brands, each meet for a good 15 minutes after pre-vetting these companies, which is really got some great feedback from that event. So since March, really been working on this masterclass, which we're getting ready to launch next month, doing some series of promoting and talking about it. It was at Expo East, at the Plant-Based World Expo, doing a little mini masterclass. Also going to be taking it to ProVeg in Berlin at the end of October. Yeah, really exciting. They're a great plant-based food accelerator in Germany, and I'm going to be doing a 3-day masterclass coursework there versus what we're planning on doing, which is a extended 8-week version, to give it in a way that people can really take in a lot of information. So happy to talk more about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's great. So thanks. You've given us a lot to talk about already. Let's back up a little bit and
Sure.
let's talk about your relationship to food. Why did you want to become a chef?
Oh, wow. I was a kid who was, as I mentioned, into two things. Was really into science. So, maybe I was just into PBS. I don't know. It was between Carl Sagan, Cosmos, and, Jacques Pepin and great chefs of the world PBS cooking series. So these were the early days of, cooking TV, and I was just taken with it. Also grew up in a family, like many people do, where cooking is a big, kind of focal point and center for family. Spent a lot of time with my grandparents, who, there was cooking and food all around, just, obviously the holidays and special things, but just even on a, weekly basis. My father is a very good cook as well. And interestingly enough, my mother early on was really into, we were cooking from Moosewood Cookbook, back in the I don't know when that came out exactly, but late 70s, my memory, early 80s of cooking a lot of healthy, a lot of vegetarian food. So I was exposed to this at an early age, and who knew it would be something popular. As a kid, I wasn't so crazy about it, but now I really have another level of appreciation to see how far it's come. So that's really what got me into it. I wanted to be in that world. I like the creative side. Then I also kind of got the bug for the business side of it. It's one thing to be creative. It's another to how do you grow that past the people that are right in front of you? And that's what I found so fascinating about, the natural foods, the plant-based packaged foods, CPG world.
I think that's interesting. And the reason I wanted to focus on that, Daniel, is because understanding the how to put a bunch of raw ingredients together, that's very creative. More importantly, being able to take those ingredients and put them together and understand the difference in how you put the recipe together. You add this ingredient at the wrong time, it dramatically changes things. Too much heat, not enough heat. There's so many things to contend with here. So, as you're learning how to become a chef and as you're starting to
Mm.
use this across all the other different jobs that you've had, what are the key takeaways that you've learned that have helped you when you work with brands today?
It's a great question. As I mentioned, the earlier part of my career, it's all about serving a meal immediately, right? The typical chef world, right? You prepare a meal, it's served immediately. Um, and then moving, I think the next step was moving into food service, realizing you have to be consistent on, hundreds, if not thousands of meals, was kind of the next level. I had an amazing opportunity when I was at Starwood Hotels, working, for the global headquarters for the brands. Part of my role was to manage a set amount of hours with a relationship that we had with the chef Jean-Georges van Richten. So Jean-Georges is known for Michelin star chefs around the restaurants around the world, and trying to see what creativity could that he could apply to the brands was fascinating. But part of my role was to make it effective at all these different, let's say it was Le Meridien, for example. So one of the projects was doing a breakfast for Le Meridien. So we started, I'm just going to kind of a little segue here just to give you that understanding of, we started with some data of what is important when someone decides to stay in a Le Meridien. So we did some great, market research survey, came back with breakfast was a key piece. Coffee was even a bigger piece of that breakfast. So we decided to do some creative, kind of ideation around how do you make a unique experience for that brand. Part of that, we ended up going with Andrea Ely for coffee, doing something very interactive with his team to make something unique. And then with Jean-Georges was coming up with some recipes. Well, we started and, he's at a skill level, off the chart and amazing, dishes. We had to then bring it down. And even though these are trained chefs working in top hotels around the world, we said, you're at a 10. We need to bring this to like a 5 level, for consistency purposes. And, often, guess what? The executive chef isn't always there for breakfast. They're usually there for dinner, and breakfast is, maybe the sous chef or, the first cook. We even had to bring it to, maybe another level down for consistency, and then figure out how to execute that, how to codify it, how to, we went into his kitchen, we videotaped, cooking these dishes. Really, consistency was key, and that was probably the biggest lesson. You go from the creative chef, you can, one dish one day, throw something in the next day, to consistency for a brand, right? Even if it's, with a chef, because you're expecting that same thing around the world. Then it goes to another level for consistency in a consumer packaged goods product, because the consumer expects it to be the same thing every time they open that pack. And that learning, I think, was the biggest, bridge in terms of, understanding how to codify, put parameters, systems in place to say at every level to confirm or to ensure that your formulation, your recipe is the right recipe. And by that, when we work with companies, I help them take a recipe, move it into something of a formulation that can be scaled, right? So you can make this on a large scale. That could just be efficiency, different types of ingredients, fresh sauteed onions. Well, if that's a refrigerated product, that'll start to degrade over time. Well, if you're looking for an onion flavor, maybe it's a, dried onion, maybe it's onion powder that can be consistent over, depending on shelf life. So knowing the science also, I have to say, has always helped of understanding shelf life extension a little bit. Putting again, I did some work for Unilever, for example, in helping them grow a line of plant forward spreads. Well, consistency was to a level that, I had a lot to learn also just from a company that large versus a smaller startup. So we had to take photographs of the product at each stage with an agreed upon, camera, setting so that we knew that that color was the right color. They even went to bring a Pantone color into it to say the product is right when it's this, this formulation, this, pH, the acidity, this color, this consistency. So an amazing process that I think all companies should really think about, especially when they work with third-party manufacturers, is, you put specs or specifications to a product to ensure your consistency. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I've learned. Did that with Chloe's going out to a big co-packer in the Midwest, where we were making them by hand in Long Island City at first, to making, doing a few thousand a week, to making, it was like 1.2 million in the first 10 days of, manufacturing them at a real large scale co-packer. But having those parameters and specs in place really make a difference and show your professionalism when you're going to a co-packer, that you know your product, and you can define it when it's correct and when it's not correct.
Thank you for breaking all that down. So critically important. Brands offer the value, the trust, the know, like, and trust. And to your point, if it's not consistent, I'm going to go elsewhere. You only get one shot to impress a customer. Or as I would like to say, you'll never get a second chance to disappoint a customer, which I think is a little bit, but anyhow. So the point being is that this is something every brand needs to know and understand. That in and of itself, we could spend hours talking about why this matters, because I see a lot of brands that take a product from their kitchen and then try to break it down and then take it to a co-packer and then take it to another co-packer, and they lose that consistency, something so critically important. So the fact that you've got that skill set, I wanted to frame it that way because that's one of the biggest reasons that I think people should be reaching out to you, because having that understanding, not just somebody who read a textbook or somebody who saw a YouTube video or something like that, but someone who's lived it and breathed it. That's so critically important. So now that you've got this experience, can you talk a little bit about why you changed your lifestyle? And where I'm going with here is, why did you adopt a plant-based diet? Why does that matter to you? And then how do you leverage that in what you do today?
Sure. For me, it was a process, and it's interesting. A lot of people come to this space from a few different areas. When David founded Plant-Based Solutions, before this, his whole career was in animal rescue and kind of philanthropy from that side. So it was from a animal rights perspective. Remember, I was a chef. I was, looking at food, as food for everyone, and wasn't limited, to the plant-based world. Some people come at it from, how do we save the planet? Right? You look at all the water usage and arable land usage for raising cattle, and they want sustainability for the planet. And they understand, and now there's a lot more education around, how a plant-based diet can really help sustain, the planet as a whole, can, start to reduce the damages of climate change as well. And then others come at it from health. And I came at it from health myself. Again, having been a cancer survivor, realizing that I needed to adopt a healthy lifestyle that was something, that would maintain and sustain me. At the time I had a young child, and I wanted also to be, I think there was a level of wanting to care about what I was doing. And I felt that, the restaurant world, again, it was my career for a long time. There's nothing against it. I just didn't see a real value to it. At the end of the day, like, what was I contributing to the world? Great. A lot of people can eat some expensive food and drink some expensive wine. It's nice, but, I'm not, what's my contribution? So I think I was just at this point in my life as a new father, just having gone through this, real health scare of saying, what can I be part of that's bigger also than me, and that can have a greater impact. I have to say, though, along the way, and as I mentioned, this was a kind of a long process. So I had gone I was eating vegetarian mostly. I had, at the time I would, have maybe some fish, some egg, whatever. And then I realized, even though I thought I was eating healthy, I ended up having high cholesterol, thinking that I was eating healthy by putting, eggs on my avocado toast. And then realized that, I need to really own this 100% and commit to it. And it was sort of really around the same, time as, a lot of conversations with David about, and I had a lot of questions about the plant, based lifestyle. And I think in that process, I educated myself a lot more on the, humane side of, my contribution as well by removing animals from the food system. Even in the restaurant world or in that process, you're pretty far removed from, actual farming, processes and just, how horrible it really is and how, inhumane it is. So I think for me, I gained a level of both empathy, greater understanding, and, just gravitated towards this group of people who I just felt were all out there for this, again, this kind of bigger cause of, we're actually helping, we're doing, something good. And I went through, a real understanding, a real process of, why am I doing what I'm doing? It's, why do I want to help these companies grow? And the way we look at it is, and I've, always looked at it from the mentoring side starting is, hey, the more plant-based companies that can get out there, the more opportunities there are for everyone, for better quality food. So, obviously, adults and the healthy lifestyles is great, but I love the idea that kids are starting to, children are starting to grow up this way, eating healthier foods, being exposed to this at a young age, having plenty of meals, that are completely plant-based, and then, plenty of kids who are growing up, vegetarian and vegan. So it's, it's an interesting path for myself, but I think for, at least in the United States, and now we're seeing obviously, and as I mentioned, places in Europe like Berlin and the UK and Israel, they're really speeding up this process. And now maybe we're speeding it up too with, the things like the Impossible Burger and, Burger King and chains, starting to bring in some plant-based options.
I think it's so great that you're doing that. I mean, when you talk about contribution, this show's all focused on teaching brands how to leverage that contribution, their mission behind their product, to get on a retailer shelf. Because as you know, retail is expensive; it's pay to play. And the point is
Yeah.
this: that if you've got a product that meets in the or exceeds the needs of the consumer that wants it, then that's more important to the savvy retailer than slotting and any other menu fees. And that's kind of a different conversation. We can get down there later. But one of the reasons, actually, the key reason I wanted to ask you that question is as we're building upon your unique tool set and as we're beginning to understand more about you and what drives you, et cetera, and understanding the importance of plant-based solutions or plant-based
Mm-hmm.
products in the ecosystem, this is critically important to helping people understand that this is not an either or type situation. On podcast episode 92, David did a phenomenal job. Everyone should listen to this. A phenomenal job of breaking down why plant based matters, why it's important, and how it can really change the world. I've had people like Seth Goldman and Chuck Muth with Beyond Meat and a bunch of other people, all different sectors, focusing on
Mm-hmm.
what's unique about this cause. Okay. And the point is
Yeah.
that we can reduce a lot of the allergens. We can produce it do a lot easier without putting such a burden on the planet. There's so many other things around this. But now let's go back to some of the things, let's pull the thread and tie some of these things together. You've got the chef ability. You
Mm-hmm.
understand the ingredients. You understand how to break it down, how to develop consistency. Now you're working with something that a lot of people would think would be really foreign: plant-based meat, plant-based
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Think of plant-based tofu, plant-based cheese, you name it. And it's kind of foreign to people, but where I wanted to go with this is how did you where does that understanding and appreciation come from of being able to make a cheese out of cashews or something else? How do you help those brands understand how to make that transition? And where I'm going with here is when you're talking about the importance of consistency, which is critically important, how do you help
Hmm.
them understand how to add that to their brand so that they can be successful?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's some challenges around. I think there's two approaches. There's a brand that is 100% plant-based, and then there's let's call them a traditional, to use the dairy analogy, a traditional cheese company that wants to get into the, non-dairy cheese game because perhaps they're losing market share. They're seeing this as kind of the wave of the future. And I think it takes two different approaches. The plant-based cheese company that started from, by a vegan, it's through passion, right? They're making it because they need it, because they love it, they're passionate about it. So it's really easy to convey both the brand values and, their ethos behind, what they're doing. And that could be expressed through, their website, through their packaging. And, we really help them kind of formulate, that message, but it's easy because they live it. On the ingredient side, that could be something as easy as, helping them scale through supply chain, or showing them some other alternative options, that could, maybe, we're starting to see people, move away from nuts. We're starting to see a lot in the legumes and oats, even enter, the non-dairy cheese. So what I love also about this is the, idea of so much biodiversity. We're getting away from every cheese being coconut or nut based, which is fantastic. Just again, it's just about more variety, right? And
Right.
it's easier to participate in, a plant-based lifestyle when there's a lot of variety, right? Because there's a lot of variety in the non-plant-based. And at the end of the day, we love, the vegan community. It's a big love fest, when we go to these events. But we know that it's the flexitarian movement is going to have a larger impact. It's going to get us there faster in, saving, removing animals from the food system and helping to save the planet because it's just such a larger demographic. The larger companies that are looking to introduce plant-based into their, that's fascinating because, and we've been, having some conversations, some inbound calls of interest from, major national and international brands that say, okay, we've been a dairy company for 100 years. How do we do this? So I think it's a combination of food science, at that scale, because they're going to go right to, national rollout very quickly. So you need that volume. Either they have the facilities that can do that, or, we help them find, major manufacturing, third party, co-man or co-packers who can really do this at scale, at food safety levels and everything that's required. But I think for them, it's also more interesting and they need more assistance in how do they communicate this idea that they can offer a plant-based alternative and still not be, abandoning their heritage as a company, and they're still going to produce, cheese, and there's companies, that have done it well and maybe quietly. I would say, I do mentoring with the Chobani Food Incubator, and by trying to push more plant-based companies into that, I feel like, that's always uh, uh, part of what I'm trying to do. I don't know if it's successful or not, but there has been plenty. But they launched a plant-based, yogurt, and they're not anti-dairy. They just see that there's a market for this, and they're joining the market. Well, many more people are going to have a plant-based yogurt alternative. That's fantastic. That's what we're looking for. So I think helping them see what that landscape looks like, let them know that this is really, sometimes we're in our own bubble, right, in the plant-based world, and to let them know that this is much larger, than a small group. It's through every, geographic location in the country. We have data for that from Spins and Nielsen. It's growing everywhere, socioeconomic. It's not just an elite thing that's, on the coasts. And I think that's a big turning point, by having data for these companies. They, listen, that's how they, operate. So by providing them with some real market data to show that this is something that could be a winning solution for them, both, obviously from our perspective, it's ethically the right thing to do, but from their perspective, they certainly, when they see that a loss of market share, this could be a way to, regain that. And who knows? There's been some companies where they've had, it just so happened that all of their products were plant-based except for maybe two. And we went to them to say, well, let's help you get these other two plant-based. And now you can stand there and say, we're a plant-based brand, right? There's no confusion of your consumer base of, oh, I can eat that SKU, I can't eat that SKU. And you now have something that you can really stand behind. Because at the end of the day, we know that the millennial, buyer market, which is a, very large group, really cares about, what your mission is and how much you stand by your mission. So to have that brand integrity, it's very easy to do when they just have, one or two, and it's like, oh, wait a second, you're only doing that because it's the cheese flavor. We can switch, we can help you switch that out. That's exciting when that happens.
So critically important that you're doing this. And to kind of frame it a little bit, you made the comment that, well, first of all, I want to touch on the fact it reduces allergens. And so I've had a lot of conversations on this podcast, Gary Hirschberg, a lot of other people, about organic and about how, when we think about back on when I was younger, I don't remember people with as many food allergies, as food ailments as there are today.
Right.
And so where did that
Absolutely.
come from? So while it's not scientifically proven that it's the processes, processed foods, etc., there's something there. And this is something that has occurred only in the last couple decades. So anyhow, like I said, talking to even Seth Goldman, I think it was Seth that we're talking about how we used to joke about how the package tastes better than the ingredients inside of it, the product inside. So that's changed so much. So plant-based is a real viable solution to anyone who's trying to get away from allergy products that create allergy type specific issues. But now you mentioned that the business side. So I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but many years ago, David reached out to me about a project that he was trying to do for the Plant-Based Food Association and wanted me to prove a theory we've been talking that I had. And the idea was that I wanted to be able to prove that plant-based foods were the ones responsible for all the driving sales across every category. So at the time, what I did, and this was the impetus for the 2016 Category Management Handbook, I'll put a link to it in the podcast show notes. But the idea was that every category is down or declining in the absence of organic, plant-based, etc. So let me frame it this way, because the data wasn't that good to be able to identify or isolate plant-based. And so if you take a look at total dairy, dairy is up 1.5%. Organic dairy was up 12%. Organic dairy represented 9.8% of a multi-billion-dollar pie. If you remove that small sliver of the business away, then total dairy is only up 0.5%. Other categories, you'd see the exact same thing, and they'd even be down more if you remove natural and organic, etc. Well, that's pretty easy to code. But back then, the coding or the breakout of the plant-based products really wasn't very accurate. And that was a huge challenge. So I actually did a project for the Plant-Based Food Association to identify how to do that, how to come up with that strategy. But the point is this. When you look at what's driving the trends across every category, I mentioned organic. Well, if you look at gluten-free, if you look at plant-based, you look at all those other features, then you can see that that's where the real growth across all channels, all CPG is. And in their absence, traditional categories, traditional products are flat or declining. So the fact that you reference this, thank you, because that's so critically important. In other words, not only does it make sense for all the reasons you've shared, but from a financial business sense, sustainability sense, here's where the CPG industry is going. And so now that you've got, go ahead, I'm sorry. What are your thoughts?
No, I was going to say absolutely correct. And I think I think the data would even show more or a greater effect. But when you're pulling from just, Spins or Nielsen, you're only looking at what's sold in retail. Remember that a lot of plant-based foods are sold direct to consumer on e-commerce. and this includes refrigerated, it includes frozen. So I think the sales are even, more than what can be shown because they're sold directly to consumer. And we don't always have the data for that.
Well, and to go one step further, and something I'm kind of reluctant to talk about a lot of times, but when you're trying to understand this unique attribute, the way the
Mm,
databases are coded do not reflect the way the consumers buy the products. And so, what I'm getting
right.
at, trying to be very, very politically correct and everything, is that if
Mm,
you're a brand and you're trying to make decisions based upon facts, you've got to have quality facts that you can use to leverage in your decision making. And I find
right.
that when I do projects for a lot of different companies across all different categories, I have to go in and clean up the data so that it identifies what is almond, what is coconut, what is whatever. And my
Mm,
point is, this is something that all brands need to be aware of. And so, kind of as a side note, but this kind of a little bit off subject, but this kind of will help frame this. I was doing a project for someone, actually helping someone else out, and they showed me a top can line report that they got from someone else. The number one brand or segment, actually the number one segment on the report was
mm.
miscellaneous. That means that there's a problem. The data's wrong. Okay. And that's the way
It's
it comes
not
out.
even coded.
No, no, it's not. And then when we're going down the list, there's nuts and then there's almonds and
Right.
coconuts. Well, wait a minute. Aren't almonds and coconuts nuts? And then, so, I mean, that's an issue. And then we're going down, we
Yeah.
found plants and we found plants and then we found kale. It's like, wait a minute, kale is a plant. So my point is this, unless you understand the data and you understand how to get the most out of that, then you're making decisions based upon that don't include the best facts. And that's my secret sauce. That's how I help brands
Yeah.
out. And that was sort of the impetus of what I was talking about in the 2016 category management handbook.
Mm,
The reality is this: the brands that you're working with need to be an expert in everything about their product, every brand in the category of the brand they compete with.
mm.
And this goes well beyond just accepting a top line canned report and say, here you go. And so now taking
Yeah.
those insights, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to add, we're doing some work for about the last, I think, year or so that kind of it relates to this, but it's really creating your own reports, your own
Exactly.
surveys, and not just as a survey monkey to your mailing list, which could be, absolutely fantastic, by the way, to find out what people are looking for. I recommend to, everyone who has a brand, build your email list. It's super valuable.
Sure.
But coming on to actually one of the modules, just kind of tie back into the upcoming master class that's relevant to this is bringing in Mark Millardi, who I've been doing some work with. He's part of New Hope, their next innovation, next consumer survey system or department, I guess you would say. They have so much data. They do the Natural Products Expo East and Expo West, and every show they have photographs of every side of every package, every ingredient list, every certification, imaging, brand look and feel, and they get all the trends. Well, what we're able to do is even when someone depends on where they are in their, life cycle, if they're starting a brand and they have decisions of, I've got all these ideas, which category should we go with? There's a way to put a survey together, and we help them kind of develop that, utilize this great database that the next team has, and we send out a survey to about 1,000 people, which is a great number, and it's across the country, different demographic groups, and you get back a real understanding of, oh, this is maybe a better category to go in what you're looking to do, or this is the flavor, or this is the people are interested in this. And what's great about that is we use it for a couple things, either for investor decks, where you could show an investor, hey, before we've even taken something to market, there's a huge interest for this. We have, this kind of data to bring back to you. And by the way, that data has been kind of validated, by Nielsen on things that have gone through this survey and have scored well. There's a great correlation between them scoring well and actually selling well. For companies that are already in market and selling, if they're looking for product, new lines, new SKUs, they're just looking to grow their brand. We find this is a great way to get that data and support your brand, even to retailers, right? So what is a retailer when you're going in to sell? you can say, hey, people are looking for this. Here's the data for it. Here's this demographic. Here's this geographic region. And they're looking for this type of product, and we have the solution for you. So instead of just waiting for something to go to market, I agree with you 100%. Having the right data is key. So when a company, without spending huge amounts of money, which is people always are very nervous about, it's very reasonable for smaller companies. You can create really, join this this survey that works with other brands as well, but you get your questions kind of put into this grouping, and you can get back some fantastic data about which direction you should go, and what people are looking for, how they respond to your messaging, to your flavor, to what goes on your label. It's really, really valuable, and happy to have Mark joining as a guest speaker on the masterclass to really dive into that a little bit further and explain it.
So critically important. And let me frame this. Let me go one step further. A lot of brands rely heavily on focus groups. And focus groups can usually, you're getting advice or information from people that don't really understand the products. So one of the things I spent a lot of time talking about, Daniel, is that big brands, big solution providers, et cetera, tend to commoditize the shopper. In other words, we're all male, we're all female. We're dumbed down to the lowest common denominator. And the point is this.
Right.
If you're asking a meat eater about vegan cheese, you're probably not going to get the same. Actually, you will not get the same answer that you would get if you asked a vegan, someone who understands it, someone who lives it. And I always use the Lohas example as the reference point. So I joke about the fact that most solution providers would say that the Lohas consumer is someone who eats a couple salads and goes for a walk. Where in our world, it's someone who's interested in reducing their carbon footprint, someone who understands the nutrient value of the products, of the ingredients in the product, and how that's going to benefit them. If you are what you eat, then what you eat matters. Food is medicine, all this other stuff. And my point is this: if you're asking the wrong questions to the wrong people, then you're going to get bad information. And that's my secret sauce. That's one of the things that I work with. So actually, to your point, I created my free turnkey sales story strategies course to teach brands and to challenge brands how to identify these core attributes. In other words, what does your core consumer look like? How do they buy your product? When they buy your product, why do they make the decisions? How do they evangelize about it when they get home? What are the other things that they buy when they buy your product, et cetera? And then now let's become an expert in your consumer, in your competition. And the point is that this is so critically important to every brand. And yet literally every brand pays lip service to this. This is perhaps the most fundamental reason that I've been able to push around big brands like P&G, Frito, et cetera, throughout my entire career. So thank you for sharing that. So now that you've brought all this together, let's talk about your master class. First of all, let's talk about plant-based solutions. What is it? Why does it matter? How do you guys fit into this universe? And then I want to go into the master class that you're talking about.
Sure. Well, Plant-Based Solutions is a business services consulting firm where we really help brands develop, launch, and scale their plant-based product. And what that means is if it's an early on concepting, stage, we can help them develop, and we've just done that recently. We help them develop their brand look, their brand name, how to communicate that brand to the public. To your point, that's super important. Who's your target market? How do they connect with you? How do you connect with them? Really define that as clearly as possible, to helping them. They had a baseline, kind of recipe of something, to turn it into a, scalable formula that could be, used with a third-party manufacturer. We help them find that third-party co-packer manufacturer, get to, benchtop testing. They actually just got approved for a January launch in South Florida, Whole Foods, about 35 of them, which is great, as a start. And we even, help on, we brought in a digital marketing team, as so many companies who are at that early stage really needed kind of full service. And as I mentioned, depending on the type of company, so many are launching direct to consumer. They need that, both website and digital marketing kind of solutions. So the scaling part also is we work with a lot of companies. They're already in market. They've got their brand. They're like, we don't need that. We don't need that. And when I go to, Expo East or Expo West, sometimes I'll talk to a brand and I'll say, what's your biggest challenge right now as a company? That's my question. And they look at me and so many times it's, oh my gosh, it's our manufacturing. We're running out of space at our co-packer. They don't have time for us. We're not treated like a priority. So working with third-party manufacturers across the country, helping them manage that process, often being kind of a liaison, kind of like it's almost a bit of a playing marriage counselor between the brand and the co-packer, because it's a delicate balance. It really is interesting how brands feel like they need so much from a co-packer, and the co-packer has 1,000 brands calling them every week. So it's how do you become important to them? What's the carrot to put in front of them? And sometimes it's helping a brand, in the growth stage. Part of scaling is, hey, they may need to raise capital. So doing events like we do at Expo West every year, helping put together pitch decks, financial models, and then sometimes getting them in front of our group of, really mission-driven investors. So we're part of Glasswall Syndicate, NCN, Nutrition Capital Network. So we get a lot of deal flow coming in ourselves of, pitch decks that we see, and we can also get them in front of people as well. And now a new part of Plant-Based Solutions is going to be launching this online masterclass to really develop, launch, and scale your plant-based brand. And as I mentioned, really excited about this. Spend some time to look at what's out there in the, in this space, right? There's free webinars, there's a lot of meetups, there's all kinds of, some guest speakers come on sometimes, but it's usually half, where most people will just watch a webinar, someone talks at them. What I thought was important was, how do we develop community? How do we do this in a way that people really learn? So I've done these, webinars, and I've gotten feedback of that was great, but you gave us so much information in this last hour that it's like drinking from a fire hose, and we just can't take it all in. So did a lot of research about how people learn and how much time is really available in terms of, a busy work week, right, for an entrepreneur. And sometimes this is for more than the entrepreneur. Sometimes this is for someone who is really interested about, this space. Maybe they're plant-based and one day they may want to start one, but they just want to educate themselves about it. So, that was an interesting learning as well. So in taking in this, some of these surveys and some reading some, studies about how adults learn, we decided to do 8-week series. Every week, it's an hour and a half of their time. We'll also pre-record it if they can't make that time. We may do 2 times because now we've got some European people coming in on board on this. But the idea is that this is a live interactive group, right? So you're part of this, you're a member of the master class, and this way there's interaction, there's pre-work, there's pre-reading that would be done. Again, we're giving them, a week to do it, to get through the reading, some exercises to do for each module. And then we'll have, I'll speak about, whatever the subject matter is. And then I'll bring in, a guest speaker who's really an expert in this space. So it's certainly not all about me, but it's about experts, and we'll just keep bringing in, new ideas and, people who really have done this, who can help. Again, this was thinking about when David and I, first started getting together mentoring. It's great to give this information, but we can only touch a couple people. Everyone needs to go through all of these pieces at the end of the day if they haven't already. So we've got brand positioning, product innovation, which is, about scaling, but it's also about how do you differentiate yourself from the marketplace. It's great that you have this idea, but there's a lot of other ideas out there, and in running a business, you have to understand that the successful brands are the ones that can really differentiate and stand out, so we want to bring that to the table. What is a go-to-market strategy? How do you build your business model? But in thinking about that, are you going direct to consumer with e-commerce? Is this a retail play? Is this something for food service? Doing a business plan, simple as, how are you forecasting? bringing those people in. There's another module on scaling your business. We're going to be bringing in a food manufacturing brand. So they're amazing. They're on the West Coast. I went to visit their operation plant. They do direct to consumer vegan meals. And talking about how they have decided to build out their own space versus working with a co-packer, and how they might start co-packing for others. So really interesting conversation. It's a kind of a different look at consumer marketing, kind of a unique approach. How do you connect to consumers? Digital marketing, e-commerce, and then raising capital, as I mentioned, is another piece. So there we have Lisa Feria from Stray Dog Capital coming in to talk about, what does it mean to raise capital, and what do investors want to hear from you? How do you successfully put together a pitch deck? So the idea is we've got these 8 modules, 8 weeks. We'll record them so you can go back into it later, but it's all going to be accessible on our plantbasedsolutions.com website. Once someone joins, they'll have access to a web portal on our site where they'll have information. They can communicate to other people in this space, answer questions. We'll try to bring as much data, support, additional readings, kind of aggregate, where there's events coming up, and try to get this information that you and I know this space so well. Another way to look at this was access, right? I'm fortunate enough to go to these, to be at Expo West and to be in San Francisco for the Good Food Institute, future of food, looking at plant-based, meat alternatives. And how do we bring access to everyone? A little bit of a peek behind the curtain. So by bringing in these experts, we can, kind of get people well along, their path in a way that fits their lifestyle. It's only a little bit of time we're asking them to dedicate every week. But by doing that week after week, they're committed to, learning about this for their business or their potential, business in the future. And we're, helping to kind of build this community and really support this community. And lucky enough to have some really interested, not just guest speakers, but some people who are going to get a little bit more involved. You mentioned Plant-Based Food Association. So on a kind of some additional supplemental pieces, we're going to, look to, Michelle Simon talking about legal. Some other people on her team already spoke to Kihi to talk about working with distributors. So it's really, really exciting. It's a lot to do. It's a new space for us. You're familiar with this online education space, and we're excited to, see, again, to even do some work with you on this as well.
I would love to. In fact, on that note, we'll talk about that more in a minute. But because I know we're kind of running out of time.
Yeah.
But no, I'd love to. This is something that David and I have been talking about for a couple of years. And the point is this, that there's a huge, huge, huge gap in the industry. I think we spend a phenomenal amount of time, and I think we do a phenomenal job teaching brands how to raise money, and then how to raise money, and then how to raise money. But we don't do an effective job, I believe, as an industry, of teaching brands how to spend it effectively, of how to leverage that, how to get the most runway out of their available dollars. The benefit is it helps you as a brand determine how long you're going to be around, a month, a week, a year, whatever. But it also makes you more attractive to investors. And that's a whole nother conversation, but thrilled that you guys are doing that. Looking forward to having more conversations about that with you. I know we're coming up on the top of the hour. Is there anything that we haven't shared? We've talked about a lot. Anything we haven't shared that you'd like to share now?
Just one piece. I'm not sure timing for getting this up, by the way. But we are going to be, and you can take this out if it's not the right timing. But October 10th, I'm going to do kind of an intro, which will be a free webinar as an intro to the masterclass. So that's something we're going to be, marketing and promoting, to get people, aware of, what this is all about. And then we'll be going live on the 24th of October. Outside of that, I think, the more people can educate themselves, your listeners, being part of the community, you bring up an excellent point in terms of how wisely can you spend, your money, and there's a lot of decisions to be made. What event should I go to? What show should I be showing at? And that's really hard. And hopefully, the more access of those shows we can bring to people, maybe they can save a couple thousand from like flying to California, to listen to some speakers. I'm really thankful that like the GFI, Good Food Institute, they posted that event live. And that was fantastic. So if you couldn't make it there, you could still learn about what's going on. Natural Products Expo East does another one. I'm going to be in Washington at the end of this week for the Reducetarian Summit in Washington, D.C. And that's another group that's, promoting the, reducing, meat, kind of another version of flexitarian. And there's going to be a lot of great guest speakers there. So I think just, being aware of what's going on, even though you're busy running your company, taking some time to, be part of the community. There's a lot of support out there. There's a lot of, free advice you can get, a lot of good people out there who just, want to share. So the more people we can, reach, the more, messaging we can get out to everyone to help them along their journey.
Thank you for sharing that. And let me add in the idea that you're running your business, you're busy, you've got a lot of things going on. But if you had an opportunity to accelerate your growth, if you had an opportunity to reevaluate, well, is this a right suggestion, right idea, et cetera, and then leverage that. Again, that's what this whole podcast is about. That's why you're here. That's why David was on before, et cetera,
Right.
Is teaching brands how to do things better, more effectively, et cetera, and getting more runway. My mission is to help you get your healthy products on more store shelves and into the hands of more shoppers. And the way we do this is as a community working together. Thank you, Daniel, for coming on today. I really appreciate your time and I appreciate your insights.
Thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to get together, to connect, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thanks. I'd like to thank Daniel for coming on today and for sharing his wisdom and his insights. I'm thrilled about their new masterclass, and I think it's going to be a real game changer for everyone in the industry, especially in the plant-based foods. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, this is where having an expert, a real true expert in your corner, can make all the difference between you being a one-hit wonder and you being a legacy brand. The focus of this podcast and every piece of my content is about that. I'll be certain to put a link to plant-based solutions in the podcast show notes and on the podcast webpage. In addition to their masterclass, you're going to want to check them out. Today's free downloadable guide is brand new. It's Trade Management Essentials to grow and scale your brand. Trade management includes everything to get your product in the hands of more shoppers. It includes all the promotional feeds, slotting, and everything else. This is something that's critical to every brand because this is where most of your dollars are spent. If you can manage this effectively, then you can get more runway to grow sales and profits. The better that you understand this, the more effective you are at choosing the promotional vehicles that are best for you instead of accepting any promotional request that a retailer, broker, or distributor puts in front of you. One of the key reasons that most brands fail. You can get this week's show notes and this free downloadable guide at brandsecretsandstrategies.com/session 146. Thank you for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.